5 nightmares that happen after you remarry at 60. Don't say yes until you know this. Welcome to the Success Mindset. I want to begin by saying how deeply grateful I am to have you here, because the very fact that you've chosen to spend a few quiet moments with me today tells me something important. You are still searching, still questioning, still open to the possibility that life has more to offer even after many of its chapters have already been written. Have you ever noticed how, as the years pass, the outside world seems to grow quieter, while the voices inside of us grow louder? The television may hum in the background after dinner, the neighbors' cars may pass slowly down the street, and the phone may buzz from time to time with distant notifications. But none of it distracts us quite the same way it once did. Instead, what becomes impossible to ignore are the questions that whisper in the heart. Maybe you felt it while walking down a grocery store aisle and catching sight of another couple, laughing as they share an apple, or argue lightly over which brand of cereal to buy. Maybe you felt it when a long evening settles in. The house is silent, and the empty chair beside you suddenly seems far too present. Or maybe it arrives in a softer, more elusive way, a small ache, a quiet tug that simply says, "I miss having someone to talk to in the evenings." If you're in your 60s or 70s and considering the possibility of remarriage, whether you've been widowed, divorced, or simply found new companionship later in life, then before we go further, I want to say this with absolute clarity. Your heart is still alive, still vibrant, still worthy of love. Wanting closeness, laughter, intimacy, or simply another human being who truly sees you is not only understandable, it is profoundly human. Too often, society subtly suggests that romance or partnership is the territory of the young, while the later decades of life should be reserved for retirement, hobbies, or grandchildren. But the truth, one I believe deeply, is that the desire for love does not retire. It does not fade simply because candles on the birthday cake multiply. In fact, for many, it sharpens, because we finally understand what matters most. That said, there is another truth we must hold alongside it. Remarriage after 60 is not the same as marriage at 20, 30, or even 40. The terrain changes. It is no longer about raising children or building careers together. It is about protecting the life you have already built, preserving the peace you have worked so hard to create, and moving forward with clarity and dignity. It is about companionship, yes, but also about foresight. That is why today, on Wise Life After 60, I want to have an honest, heart-to-heart conversation with you about the hidden struggles that come with remarrying later in life. This is not to discourage you. Quite the opposite. Love after 60 can be a beautiful blessing, a healing balm for loneliness, a spark of joy you thought might never return. But love at this age must walk hand in hand with wisdom. It must be guided not only by the heart, but also by the lessons we've earned through decades of living. Because when we say yes too quickly, when we step into a new marriage without fully understanding what may come, the consequences can be heavy, not only for ourselves, but also for our families and the legacies we hope to leave behind. So, let us gently open this conversation by exploring what I call the 5 hidden storms of remarriage after 60. Think of them not as reasons to avoid love, but as lanterns to light your way. By naming them, you will be better prepared to step forward with both confidence and compassion. And as we walk through them together, I invite you to reflect on your own life, to pause when something resonates, and perhaps even to share your experiences so that others walking this same road may be guided by your wisdom. The first hidden storm is one that catches many by surprise, often with painful consequences. It is the storm of financial vulnerability. I once knew a woman, a widow, who had lived carefully for years on her husband's pension and her survivor benefits from Social Security. It wasn't a fortune, but it was steady. It gave her a sense of security, a small but sturdy boat to carry her across the later seasons of life. She paid her bills on time, bought groceries without anxiety, and allowed herself an occasional treat, a dinner out with friends, a weekend trip to see her grandchildren. Life was modest, but it was stable. Then, after many years of loneliness, she met someone new. He was kind. He was attentive. He made her laugh in a way she hadn't laughed in years. And when he asked her to marry him, she said yes with joy in her heart. But within months of that marriage, something happened she had never anticipated. Her survivor benefits disappeared. Just like that, gone. A third of her monthly income vanished, and with it, much of her financial stability. No one had told her that remarrying at her age would cancel the benefits she depended on. That story has stayed with me for years, not because it is unique, but because it is far too common. Many people assume that by the time we reach our 60s, money has been figured out. We've paid off the mortgage, saved for retirement, maybe even helped our children launch into their own lives. But here is the hard truth. Marriage over 60 can reshape finances in ways we don't expect. And if we do not see it coming, the ripple effects can be devastating. When we say, "I do," the law often stops seeing us as two individuals and begins to treat us as one financial unit. Bank accounts that we thought were separate may suddenly be considered joint property. Debts we never signed up for can quietly become our responsibility. Pensions and retirement benefits that once felt solid can shift or even vanish. A lifetime of careful planning can be undone by a single signature on a marriage license. And even when couples begin with the best of intentions, promising to keep finances separate, pledging not to burden each other, life has a way of blurring those lines. Illness arrives, bills pile up, and suddenly, what was once separate becomes tangled. What began as a companionship of equals can transform into a financial arrangement neither party intended. The philosopher Seneca once wrote, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more, that is poor." Yet in our later years, it is not craving more that impoverishes us. It is losing what we already have because we didn't see the risks clearly. That loss can weigh heavier than any unfulfilled desire, because it is not only about money, it is about independence, about freedom, about the to step into each day without fear. So, if you are considering remarriage after 60, pause long enough to look carefully at your financial map. Ask the unromantic but necessary questions. What will this mean for my retirement income, for my Social Security benefits, for the legacy I hope to leave behind? Will my independence still be secure? These questions are not barriers to love. They are acts of love. For yourself, for your children, and for the life you have built with so much effort. Because here is the truth. Financial vulnerability is not about dollars and cents. It is about whether you can carry the peace of mind you have today into the future. Once that peace is lost, no wedding ring can restore it. But money, important as it is not the only place where storms gather. Sometimes the hardest struggles do not come from bank accounts, but from the people who sit closest to us at the table. This brings us to the second hidden storm: family conflicts and inheritance tensions. Why is it that some of the heaviest storms in life come not from strangers, but from our own families? When a parent remarries in their later years, children and grandchildren may smile, hug, and offer warm congratulations. On the surface, everything looks supportive, but beneath that surface, unease often lingers. They may wonder, will this new spouse change our family traditions? Will inheritance be divided differently now? Will I lose some of the closeness I've always felt with my parent? What begins as joy for you can quietly feel like loss for them. And unless those feelings are acknowledged, they can harden into resentment. There is an old proverb: shared joy is doubled, shared sorrow is halved. But in families unsettled by change, joy does not always multiply. Sometimes it shrinks. A remarriage that feels like a blessing to you may feel like a threat to them. And if these tensions remain unspoken, they can slowly erode the very bonds you've cherished all your life. Confucius once said, "The strength of a nation derives from the integrity of the home." At this stage of life, our home is not only the place we live, but also the network of relationships, children, grandchildren, siblings that surround us. Protecting that bond matters as much as protecting finances or health. If remarriage becomes a source of division rather than harmony, the price may be too high. This is why open, compassionate communication is vital. Talk with your family. Listen to their fears without judgment. Share your intentions clearly. And if needed, put practical safeguards in place so that everyone understands how inheritance or assets will be handled. The goal is not to surrender your right to happiness, but to ensure that your happiness does not unintentionally create wounds for those you love most. When families are invited into the conversation early, harmony has a chance to grow. When they are left in the dark, suspicion almost always fills the space. So I will pause here and ask you directly, have you seen a family go through this? Did harmony eventually return, or did distance remain? Your reflections, if shared, may be the very guidance another person needs right now as they stand at the same crossroads. Because in the end, remarriage after 60 is not only the joining of two hearts, it is also the joining of two legacies. And those legacies deserve to be honored, not clouded by conflict. We have already walked together through the first two hidden storms of remarriage after 60, the risk of financial vulnerability and the often unspoken but powerful tensions within families. Those storms alone are enough to make many pause, and wisely so. But as life reminds us again and again, the heart's journey rarely stops at two challenges. As we move deeper into this conversation, we must acknowledge that the later seasons of life carry with them realities that cannot be ignored. Realities of health, energy, and freedom. And if we do not see them clearly before we say yes again, they can quietly transform what began as a dream of companionship into a daily weight we had not prepared to carry. The third hidden storm is what I call health responsibility overload. It is perhaps the most sobering of all because it begins in moments of joy and often ends in unexpected burdens. Picture this: two people in their 60s, both of them long past the turbulent demands of raising children or climbing the career ladder, meet one day, perhaps through a community gathering, perhaps online, perhaps simply through a neighbor's introduction. They share coffee, they laugh, they exchange stories of childhood, of travels long past, of losses endured. And something begins to stir. After years of loneliness, there is suddenly a lightness again, a reason to smile, a hand to hold during walks in the park, the feeling of not being invisible in a world that often rushes past the elderly as though they no longer matter. For a while, life feels beautifully simple. But then, as so often happens, reality steps in with its quiet gravity. One morning, it is a doctor's appointment that seems routine, but delivers unsettling news. A few months later, it is another diagnosis, then a new prescription, then a steady rhythm of hospital visits, and before either person realizes what has happened, the marriage that began with shared companionship has quietly become centered on caretaking. The love remains, but its expression is transformed from laughter and discovery into scheduling medications, managing pillboxes, organizing insurance forms, and lying awake at night listening for signs of distress. I once watched this unfold in the life of a dear friend. She remarried in her late 60s, filled with joy at having found companionship again. She was not naive. She knew health could change at any time. But she did not anticipate how quickly she would be asked to surrender her new freedom. Within a few years, she found herself less a wife and more a full-time nurse. She cooked carefully balanced meals to support his condition. She drove him to specialists several times a week. She learned the intricacies of medical jargon she never wanted to know. And one day, in a moment of raw exhaustion, she admitted to me with tears in her eyes, "I didn't realize that saying yes to him meant saying yes to becoming a caregiver all over again." Her words capture the essence of health responsibility overload. In our later years, illness is not an exception. It is an inevitability waiting just outside the door. Arthritis, memory decline, diabetes, cardiovascular issues, diminished hearing or vision. These are not distant possibilities, but likely companions as time advances. And when they arrive, they do not affect only the person diagnosed. They ripple through the life of the spouse, reshaping every routine, every plan, and every ounce of emotional energy. This is where the paradox of love in later life becomes sharpest. On the one hand, we yearn for companionship and the promise of not being alone. On the other hand, that very companionship may demand of us a level of caretaking we had thought we were finally free from. For many, it can feel like reliving earlier decades when they sacrificed their own rest, hobbies, and independence to care for children, spouses, or aging parents. Just when they thought they had earned the right to rest, they find themselves drawn back into the same cycle. The poet Rumi once wrote, "Try to accept the changing seasons of your heart, even if winter comes unexpectedly." That wisdom is profoundly relevant here. The question that remarriage after 60 quietly asks is this: are we prepared for the winters as well as the springs? It is easy to say yes to companionship when it comes in the form of Sunday picnics, late-night conversations, and leisurely travel. But can we say yes when it arrives cloaked in IV drips, sleepless nights, and the relentless weight of responsibility? Caregiving is not only physical, it is profoundly emotional. It is the quiet loneliness of watching your partner decline. It is the frustration of seeing plans evaporate. It is the exhaustion of waking each day already depleted. And while love can certainly carry us through, we must be honest. Love without preparation may buckle under the strain. That is why the most compassionate step we can take before remarrying is to discuss health openly and honestly. It may feel unromantic, but it is in fact one of the deepest expressions of care. Ask one another, what are your current health challenges? What conditions run in your family? How would you want to be cared for if illness worsens? Are we both willing and able to step into the role of caregiver if needed? And perhaps most importantly, what support systems do we have beyond each other? To remarry at this age without addressing health is like building a house on shifting sand. It may stand for a while, but eventually the foundation will give way. By asking these difficult questions, by planning for support, by involving extended family or community resources, we give love the stability it needs to survive not only the easy seasons, but also the hard winters. Because in the end, health responsibility overload teaches us this: the truest test of senior romance is not found in candlelit dinners or weekend getaways. It is found in the fragile mornings, the long nights, and the quiet courage of facing sickness side by side. And only when we are ready for that do we truly know if our yes is strong enough. Yet as heavy as that burden may sound, there is another storm that is subtler but no less real. It is not about money, not about family, not even about health. It is about something we discover often, for the first time, only after 60. The treasure of personal freedom. Which brings us to the fourth hidden storm: loss of personal freedom. There is a unique gift that often comes with later life. After decades of giving, raising children, supporting spouses, juggling careers, paying mortgages, balancing responsibilities, many people reach their 60s or 70s and discover, sometimes for the very first time, a quiet kind of freedom. It is not flashy, but it is profound. It is the freedom to wake when you wish, to shape the day according to your own rhythms, to eat when you are hungry, to rest when you are tired, to decide without compromise how to spend the precious hours you have left. For some, it is the freedom of no longer being tethered to a demanding career. For others, it is the freedom of living alone, after years of constant caregiving for others. For many, it is the deep satisfaction of being able to finally hear their own thoughts without constant interruption. This freedom, once tasted, can feel like one of the greatest gifts of aging. But remarriage, even when born of love, inevitably alters that freedom. Suddenly, the morning routine is no longer solely yours. It must align with someone else's. The evening choices are no longer just your preferences. They become shared decisions. Travel plans, meal times, television shows, even the arrangement of furniture. These become subjects of negotiation rather than simple personal choices. And though compromise is the nature of all relationships, at this stage of life, it can feel like giving up a hard-won treasure. Jean-Jacques Rousseau once observed, "Man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains." For those in their later years, those chains are not imposed by governments or workplaces, but by the commitments we voluntarily accept in the name of love. The question, then, is not whether the chains exist, but whether we are willing to trade a portion of our freedom for the warmth of companionship. Some find great joy in that trade. They relish the shared meals, the shared decisions, the gentle comfort of knowing someone else is always present. For them, surrendering some independence feels like a small price for intimacy. But others, even when they love deeply, may find themselves quietly resenting the loss. They may feel frustration at having to negotiate decisions that once felt blissfully simple. They may long for solitude that is no longer possible. And they may begin to ask themselves, have I traded too much? The danger lies in ignoring this reality. Too often, people enter remarriage thinking only of what they will gain and not of what they might lose. They imagine companionship, but forget that companionship comes wrapped in compromise. They dream of shared adventures, but forget that sharing means surrendering certain freedoms. And so, disappointment grows where clarity was missing. The wisest step, then, is to acknowledge openly that remarriage at this age is not only about gaining love, but also about relinquishing independence. Neither choice is wrong, but both choices come with consequences. If you are someone who treasures your solitude, who delights in the freedom to live life entirely on your own terms, then remarriage will ask you to loosen your grip on that treasure. If you are someone who feels loneliness more deeply than you value independence, then the trade may feel worth it. The point is not to choose what others expect, but to choose consciously, with full awareness of what will change. I often invite seniors to ask themselves a simple but profound question. If you had to choose between preserving your freedom exactly as it is today or gaining companionship at the cost of sharing that freedom, which would you choose and why? There is no universal right answer, but answering honestly for yourself may prevent years of hidden resentment later. Because in truth, the loss of personal freedom may not sound as dramatic as financial collapse or legal battles, but in the quiet of daily life, it may weigh heavier than anything else. At this stage, what many value most is not adventure, not even romance, but peace. And peace often rests on the ability to live life on one's own terms. So, as you stand at the threshold of remarriage, do not ask only, "Will this person love me?" Ask also, "Am I willing to share my freedom with them?" Because in the end, love after 60 is not only about companionship. It is about crafting a life that preserves peace, dignity, and the independence that makes these years so precious. The last hidden storm of remarriage after 60 is one that often remains invisible until it is too late: legal complications. Unlike finances, which we can see in bank statements, or family tensions, which show up in conversations and silences, legal consequences lurk quietly in the background, waiting for a moment to reveal themselves. Many people believe that once they have written a will or named beneficiaries, their intentions are set in stone. But the law does not work that way. The simple act of remarriage can override decades of careful planning. Imagine, for instance, a man in his late 60s who lovingly drafted a will years earlier, ensuring that his home and savings would one day pass to his children. He remarries, assuming that paperwork remains valid. What he does not realize is that the new marriage has altered the legal framework, granting his spouse automatic rights that surpass the will's instructions. When he eventually passes, his children face not comfort but conflict, discovering that the legacy they believe secure has been reshaped by laws he never reviewed. This is not malice, but simply the machinery of the legal system, unfeeling, precise, and indifferent to memories or intentions. Aristotle once said, "The law is reason free from passion," and nowhere is that truth felt more sharply than here. Without updated documents, inheritance, property, even medical decisions may default to a spouse rather than children, siblings, or trusted friends. To avoid this storm, preparation is essential. Updating wills, clarifying property ownership, revisiting powers of attorney, these may seem unromantic, but they are acts of profound love. They ensure that our later years end in harmony, not disputes, and that our final wishes are honored. So what do we make of all these storms? Financial risk, family conflict, health burdens, loss of freedom, and legal tangles. Do they mean love after 60 should be avoided? I do not believe so. What they mean is that love at this stage must be paired with wisdom, with foresight, with the courage to ask difficult questions before giving tender answers. To say yes in later life is not about pretending we are young again, but about honoring the decades we have already lived and choosing companionship with open eyes. If we can do that, if we can protect peace while opening the heart, then remarriage after 60 can indeed be a blessing, not a burden.